I followed on from a small Kia, being intrigued by somebody that was in the industry, that was a female, that I found as like a baller, a winemaker. Passion, hard work, but a lot of friendship and love for each other and the people that are around you. Without a good team, you can't make a good wine. A team that has nurtured me on my bad days and stood next to me on my great days. Because I did take a little step out of winemaking for a little bit and made whiskey and travelled, but I definitely feel like now I've found my home and my place and my people. And I think that's important when you're doing anything that you're passionate about. It's not really a career and it's not really a job, it's your art. And I think that you definitely see more females in bigger roles, leading a team as chief winemakers, sommeliers, in the cellar, jobs that before were probably held by men. Look, I was quite scared going into this vintage. I was quite anxious. I'm normally the one that's quite excited, and I think being able to have a say in the products and the tools and the processes that you use, for me, is something that I will always carry on. But I think that if you're not learning and you're not taking anything on, the enjoyment's not there. Great bottles of wine start in the vineyard, and I've been in the industry since I was 17, and only in the last 2 years seen grapes actually being harvested. We're very grateful for our growers that they grow quality fruit. There's a lot of R&D and a lot of people doing some really wild research with winemaking that wasn't around 20 years ago. You're always going to use traditional techniques because the tradition of winemaking is ancient. I think that the Riverina, I think it's harder. I think it's harder to sell products from here because people don't hold the Riverina in the same regard as other regions. We're very lucky to have certain varieties that are obscure that actually grow really well in our region. Our region is renowned for our botrytis. For anybody that has made botrytis, I feel sorry for you. It's like you have another vintage in the middle of the year. It's like you finish and then it all starts again. And that can be hit and miss as well. Some years are damp and the perfect growing conditions for botrytis, and then other years you don't get any at all. It's just a late harvest. And I have a sense of that you're all in it together, irrespective of what logo you hold on your shirt. I think that just in our region at the moment, we've got generational differences between women, which is a nice thing to see in the industry. And there are women doing great things.
I think the process of taking something from the ground and then making into something that everyone can enjoy, and from all different walks of life, from all different tastes and personalities. You can take something from the ground and follow that through to produce a wine that can be enjoyed in so many different occasions. We need to leave this world in a better place than we found it. The wine industry is really pushing for that to happen, whether it be in a winery, in a vineyard, all the different facets of producing wine. The focus is on sustainability. The fact that it is more gender equal now is also a game changer, because it doesn't have to be a male-dominated industry, and no longer is. So that's really good. But we rely so much on the weather, and you could have in your mind, this is what I'm going to do with grapes from that vineyard, but the weather will change things very quickly for you. So traditions needs to be part of it. I think with innovation technology, things have moved forward, but you still need to hold on to the tradition of making wine. With this grade, to produce that wine, it still needs to be part tradition, because things are always moving forward and technology is always moving forward, but you still need to have that hands-on traditional approach to making wine. I think with climate change, it's looking at varieties that suit this region. and you see that coming through the winery. Different varieties that handle the weather here, the heat here, a lot better than other varieties in this region, and it's just grasping those and trying to push them up and showcase them to the general public. I think winemakers in the Riverina do tend to come up against a lot more challenges than other regions. I've had with winemakers outside of this region, they, deal with a lot of issues that we have to deal with, and so it makes our job a little bit more tricky, but also more rewarding that we can do that. I would say probably Shiraz is my great variety. It's different. It's very diverse across the regions. What we have here, Barossa, Hunter Valley, it's those varieties that you could look at it and say where the wine comes from. And one wine that I do tend to do a lot of work with in my current role. So, yeah, you've got your challenges, but I think that we here in the Riverina have learned to adapt to that and actually produce a very consistent wine year in, year out, regardless of those seasons. The wet seasons that we've had up until this year, I think we've produced great quality out of those, where people probably wouldn't think we could if they looked at the, we had and what was going on in the vineyards. That can, I think the whole winemaking process is very creative. Different that we use, putting those oaks together, balancing that, tannins with yeast cultures, yeast varieties. And so all of that's creative, and you can have 10 different Shiraz, for example, and have different oaks on them, and they all look so different. It's just being creative and putting which ones work well together.
What attracted me was the combination between art, science and agriculture. It is quite a varied job. I can be technical in ag, or I can be creative, so that suits my personality. So I'm always thinking about the next thing, the next improvement or the next opportunity or the next wine or whatever. So we used to make wines all very similarly to a style, but I like to think that we have diversity of gender and culture and wine styles, our markets. So I think that what gives me hope is accepting the diversity within our community, therefore our business, and therefore the wines we make aren't just things that we would drink. They're things that we wouldn't drink, therefore we've got a diverse range that'll suit a lot of different people. 2025 was a really big vintage when you're pushed that far out of your comfort zone. So we basically took in 25% more than we thought we would. You always learn something about yourself. So it sort of goes back to what I said prior, which is I don't see myself or my role as ever finished or not learning. Every vintage, there's something different that we learn. This year I learned about scale and how to bring in that amount of tonnes through the winery. And I'm really proud of what the team achieved and how we managed to do that. During vintage, as you see more of your team than you do of your families. So we've just finished that and we still get along. So that's a good thing, that we've spent all that time together, done all that work, and it's still a nice environment to be. Varietal integrity needs to be philosophy for what we make. So without sounding too romantic about it all, we still do, the art in winemaking still is the integrity of variety. So even though we're making wines that have got a lot of oak or a little bit of oak or a lot of sugar, whatever the artifact is in it, they still need to look like their heritage, like a Cabernet or a Chardonnay, whatever it should be. I'm big on innovation. So we, as winemakers, our industry has been doing the same thing for hundreds of years and just selling a different story, like whoever's got the best story. So literally you could make wine. You could put a bunch of grapes in a bucket. As long as you adjust the pH, you're going to get wine. It's not that hard. It's selling a different story. So I think we're at a stage where I'm quite excited about innovation and using technology to make our wines better or cheaper or bringing us to the next level. History is certainly, will always be there and will be a big part of it, but I think the consumers are tired of hearing the same story rebranded. You can't have any ego to work here because we are at the least romantic end of the industry. So to make your living here, you have to work harder to a degree and be more creative with what you're doing. If I could only drink and make one wine for the rest of my life, it would be Chardonnay. Chardonnay can just have many different forms. I love the way it responds to artifact and to oak. I love everything about it, and it's the one wine that I keep tasting and thinking, how was that made, and where did that bit of sulphide come from, or what oak did they use, or what did their lees look like. It's just, I find it really interesting to unpack.
Patience, definitely. You know, not pulling the trigger too quickly sometimes, or making picking decisions, and, you know, definitely having a bit of gut intuition, and definitely will take a lot of that from there. You might have a spec to hit, but if it doesn't look right, you kind of got to make a call and make those decisions. So yeah, it can be interesting some days. I start out in the vineyard and I inspect a lot of the blocks in the vineyards with our growers, and I sort of touch base a lot with them, and we sample, we test and have a look. And then I make sort of scheduling and picking decisions based off that. And then I see from grape to bottle, which is really exciting. I like that. And then in the winery, we bring the grapes in, we make the wine, and then seeing it go into bottle at the end it's very satisfying to then just open that and share it with someone at home or family or friends. Philosophy, like at the end of the day, a wine just needs to be enjoyable and people need to enjoy what they're drinking. I don't like to, you know, give someone something that they might not like or whatever. So I just tend to, you know, fruit forward, something interesting, maybe a little bit of complexity, but at the end of the day, something that's drinkable and enjoyable. Well, a lot of wineries recycle the grape marc and it sends to Tarak or distilleries, and it gets turned into ethanol, which a lot of places will like for spirit, so that'll get reused in fortified wines. Sustainability, we've recently at the winery just put in over 1,000 kilowatt solar panels, so that's pretty good for us as well. Hoping to get net zero, but in time. We were in the Riverina, and the Riverina is quite a warm climate area. It's the food bowl of this state, so we grow everything here. Water is quite a big issue, so warmer climate, we tend to need a little bit more water, but there are introductions of like weather resistant and weather tolerant varietals. So some of the Mediterranean varietals, so you'll see like Fiano and Nera d'Avola and Sangiovese, they all come from outside of Australia, but they're a bit more like heat tolerant and they're a little bit more like disease resistant as well. So those sorts of things are definitely have been coming into the industry for quite a while, but I think they'll continue as well. There'll still be a place for Chardonnay and Shiraz, the usual suspects, but yeah, that's something I think will add to what the future will have. It's very important, you know, with people and families and commitments, it can get quite difficult. So, you know, just supporting one another is probably the main thing, I would think. And I hope that maybe I can help support some others. It's a wonderful space now, and there's so much support with everyone. And you get to embrace that creative, artistic, science side of yourself. If those are the things that you like, do it, because I'm so glad I did.
I think when they hear where I come from or what I done, they get a little bit surprised because I start so young. It's like I was 15, I left home when I was 21, I finished uni and I left, basically. So I started traveling and I started moving back and forward, doing vintages. So I think that path sometimes surprise people or impress them sometimes, especially when they are really young, they're like 20 or 25. And by that time I already was supervised, or I was already done like 10 vintages by them. So it's like showing them that you can do, you can always learn something, and I think it's quite impressive if you are perseverant. I think it's, I don't know if my patience, that is not my skill, but I have learned to be patient and to teach or train people to do what I do, because we are a bit smaller, so you have to go more forward to the people you work with, so you do have a lot of contact with them. So I think strength and leadership, it will be more of my biggest strength. I started in the cellar and then the lab, and then I moved after vintage in the office. And it was always young people. You always show them how to work, what to do, and that has a lot to do with it. So it's how you start molding your team day by day. I think that is the biggest one. I don't think it's another wise like the Riverina. Everybody has a different expression. I think the Riverina has their own, really very own expression about to show what they do, like they do Durif or Shiraz, and everybody I think is just expressed so differently, and it's great to taste everyone wines, not only divine wines, if not all the Riverina wines are different. I would like that people say, oh, don't be so scared, or step forward, because you get scared when you're young and you're like, oh, shouldn't, or I should say, or give your opinion, because sometimes give your opinion, what do you think about this wine? And you are like, it's good. No, but when you learn with the time, but in that moment when I was young, I would like to say, or someone would say, or be more forward what you want, or what you really think about it, instead like, hold a little bit.
My mum worked for the company as well as my dad. It was where they met. And mum actually wanted to be a winemaker. And dad worked in IT for the company for basically his whole career. But it was sort of just that thing my parents did for most of my childhood. But when I was sort of leaving school, the company did a cadetship program for members of the family to be introduced to the company. Dad thought that I would want to do it, but my uncle thought I would, and he said you should really apply for it and go ahead and do it, and I did, and it sort of just snowballed from there. I did different parts of the company. I did supply chain, finance, sales, that sort of thing. But falling into winemaking was, I'm a scientist at heart, I think, and I worked in the lab for a bit, did a couple of vintages, and it just sort of happened naturally. I went back to uni to do wine science, and then the company asked me if I wanted to be a winemaker, and I said yes, and I started out as an assistant winemaker. I think that winemaking is both sort of a science and an art for me. You need to understand how all the bits and pieces work, and why you do certain things and what impact that has. I make all our Chardonnays, all of our Moscatos. I also make all of the Aperas, which is kind of what McWilliams is known for, is their cream Apera was the big one in the late 60s, 70s. You work with what you've got. So what the vintage gives you, what comes off the vine, that's what you've got to work with. So you work with what you're looking at. That's the only way really to do it. I think there is a place for tradition, but I also think that at the end of the day, winemaking is a science, and science is progressive. You're learning new things all the time, new techniques become available, new technologies. So I think in that regard, you've got to move with what's new. But I think that there's a space for tradition, especially in a family business. My favourite one to make is Tumbarumba Chardonnay, which obviously is not like local varieties, but I just think that there's a lot of room for experimentation when I get to work with it. And I just love the chance to do something fun and creative. The Riverina wine industry, it's small, so we pretty much all know each other. And I think that there's a community there that is very supportive. Honestly, winemaking is both a science and an art. And it's all about using what you know as a scientist to create something that people will want to drink. So I do think that that is a major part of it, and that's where it shows up. Drinking wine's about finding something you like. It's not about whether you can describe if it smells like blackberries or whatever. It's about finding something you like and enjoying it. And that's what I hope for when people drink any wine I make. But I think, I don't really mind what people think when they hear my story. Everyone's had a different experience in their career, and that's just mine. I hope that people see, I think, the hard work and just the results of what you do. That is probably what you want people to remember, because it's, at the end of the day, that's what you're doing.
There's a lot more innovation in winemaking at the moment, and there's a lot of products that are supporting making wines greener. So I think it's really important that we embrace that, and I think most winemakers are, because number one, it saves money, but number two, so oftentimes it's actually better for the wine. Because once upon a time, people never drank wine the way as commercially as what we do. They would have had, in Italy now, they still, when it's vintage time, they just drink juice out of a jug it's not filtered. It's full of all the solids, and a bit sort of like what the craft beers do now. There's a lot of solids in it, where we clean most of that out in most wines. So that traditionally wasn't how wine was consumed. So we want every bottle to look the same from the whole 12 months, basically, which is most of the time how long you're packaging it for. So I think the thing with a lot of techniques, clever additives, like smarter and more specific yeasts and enzymes, and getting away from animal proteins and moving towards vegetable proteins, is so that we sort of, it's lighter on the carbon footprint as well. That's important as well. So there's a lot of change that way. So I think you probably can't do one without the other. And I think traditional winemaking for me has always been minimalist, because I grew up, I was taught by Italians how to make wine in the shed, or plonk. We used to call it make plonk in the shed. So basically the only additive that they used to add was sulfur to finish after malolactic fermentation had occurred on reds. That's it. Even on their whites, they didn't add sulfur. And then because of that understanding that they did minimal additives, when I used to make wine, I used to be really hesitant to use sulfurs. I'd often use tannins because they're derived from grapes, either seeds or skins. So that way, that helps preserve the wine without having something that's not wine going into wine. So that was my philosophy from being like a 3 and 4 year old child being thrown into a wheelbarrow squishing grapes, you know what I mean, to make plonk in the shed. So I think, to me, it's just a marriage. We've got that understanding, we've got that love, we've got that passion, we've got that, we want our industry to be sustainable, we want it to move forward, but really everything old is new again. That's the way I look at it. And that's my roots, so that I always go back to that. Well, what would I have done? Why am I adding this? Or do I need to add this? So I think that's, especially when I ask myself that 1,000 times before I add anything that's not grape, or if it's an oak additive that's from a good quality oak. On our own vineyard, we do minimal everything. And I was sort of saying, if it's not grape, then why are we adding it? So we've always sort of run our farm a lot more labour intensive than a lot of vineyards. And that's carried through into the way I make wine as well. I really like to add things if I really need to, and at the absolute at the time when it really has to be added. So if it's not grape or grape derived, then it's something that I question heavily whether I'm going to add it. So I think that it has to be sustainable if you do it that way. And also the other thing is, the mentality is, how can I do this smarter, not harder? And keeping that in line with sustainable practices, because that's always a goal, has been from when I started making wine.